The individualism of Generation N is a continuation of a trend that began with the original baby boom. Nners, like boomers and Xers, want products and services to be customized to meet their individual needs. This phenomenon feeds on itself, as highly competitive businesses offer more customization. Consumers expect a wider range of products to be tailored to their tastes and interests. The members of Generation N have had a great deal of independence from early in life. They're used to making their own choices about how they spend their money. Although their parents do spend a great deal of money on them, they control a lot of their own purchases, and they influence many family purchases as well. Like their boomer parents, Generation N is not inclined to unquestioningly accept the wisdom of those in authority. If you want them to believe that your product is good for them, for example, you have to tell them why. Young people have heard every advertising claim imaginable. Their response is most likely to be, prove it. One of the biggest challenges for businesses today is breaking through ad clutter. This generation has been exposed to advertising from birth. They are exposed to an extraordinary amount of advertising on any given day as they watch television, listen to the radio, attend sports events, and surf the internet. Advertising and corporate logos can be found all over their clothing. Cross promotions ensure they'll get advertising for other products with their fast food meals. They are not even safe from advertising in schools, which are increasingly turning to corporate sponsorships to make up budget deficits. Complicating matters is the fact that this generation is wise to advertising. They understand its aims and its workings. They know when they are being targeted. They ridicule poorly conceived or executed advertising. So how do you cut through the ad clutter? Well, less is sometimes more. Although many marketers use an MTV style with its rapidly changing graphics and blaring sound to grab the attention of young people, sometimes less is more. A little clear space around your message can be just as attention-grabbing. It's precisely because so much advertising targeting young people is loud and, as they say, in your face, that a quieter approach can stand out. Use humor. Like their parents, today's young people don't take themselves too seriously. Humor can even be used successfully with relatively serious topics. Give them something for nothing. Freebies can be very attractive to young people who have a limited amount of money to spend. Most important of all, however, is tight targeting. One of the key elements of McDonald's success was targeting multiple market segments with different ad campaigns. Companies that understand the different segments of this market will have a competitive advantage. In many ways, Generation N resembles Generation X and the baby boom. But their world is different from that in which the other generations came of age. The similarities between these generations are important, and they provide common points of reference that businesses can use to reach a broad audience. But their differences are as important or more so, and understanding these will be vital to reaching this generation. In closing, I want to say that personally I like this generation. Their optimism and confidence may be born of naivete, but it's certainly refreshing. They may at times be brash, but given the problems they will inherit, this is far preferable to timidity. Historians say that at the close of a century, we tend to look back And as the new century begins, we turn our gaze forward. While those of us who are members of older generations are reflecting on all that's gone before, Generation N is already anticipating the future. When the rest of us get there, they'll be waiting. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Let us begin the first question and answer session. We will try to answer as many questions as possible, but we ask that only one question be asked per phone call and that these questions be as brief as possible. You may call the studio directly at the phone numbers or fax which now appear on your screen. And we remind you to make your phone calls at a distance from the monitor to help avoiding feedback. Let's go to our first call, please. It is from the Centro Internacional de Desarrollo Empresarial del Perú in Lima. And the question, please.
Yes, my name is Federico Delgado from Lima. Thank you and welcome to Peru and the Republic of China for coming to the network of the International Training Center in San Diego. My question is, the fast technological advance could change society and diversify it into a more technical segment and another one that would be left behind. What strategy should be taken in developing countries where the access to universities is in a proportion of 1 out of 60 students? Also, what type of measures should we take for this technological change that leaves behind traditional technical people who are not flexible and still believe about companies who are made of concrete? Thank you.
Thank you. Those are two excellent questions. I'm going to break that up into two, if I may. And Susan asked you to address the first piece on the technical, non-technical piece, and then we'll go to Professor Cheng for the second portion.
Yes, and this is a very good question and a very significant issue in the U.S. and every country of the globe. There is potential for two groups of people to emerge among the young generation, the haves and the have-nots, and technology is driving a furtherance of that split. It's absolutely vital that in any way possible, all segments of society, of the young generation, receive exposure to and training in some forms of technology. And I recognize the difficulties involved in that for many countries, but to the degree they can, exposure to those technologies at an early age is very, very important.
Thank you for that insight, Susan. Professor Cheng, how do we address the generational issues where perhaps a previous generation is perceived as being unbending or unwielding to new ideas and new thoughts?
Yes, I think that all human beings are to some degree afraid of change, and this is not unusual. In the United States, we've seen workers who were trained in using hands in drawing move into using the computer for drawing, for example. So this requires vision and this requires determination from a collective body of people, understanding that technology is an advancement of humanity, that we share this advancement, that we all should move toward that area and not resent the fact that some know how to do it and some don't. Right. So it's an empowerment issue. Technology is a benefit, not a burden or not a deficit or a burden. Right.
Very good. Thank you very much. We're going to go to our second question now, and our question comes from the Federación Nacional de Comerciantes, Medellín, Colombia. The question, please. Susan, in one of your books, you say that the younger generations born in general after World War II, the boomers, Xers, Yers, and Ners, are more likely to be distrustful of some than others. Can you explain a little bit why that's the case?
Well, I think world events are part of the problem, but individualism is also part of the problem. we're more individualistic. Each successively younger generation is more individualistic, and without the sort of sense of collective responsibility and that we're sort of in this together, individualism can breed a sort of distrust and cynicism. And in the U.S. in particular, a lot of younger generations have become cynical. Businesses share some of the responsibility for this because they haven't always been honest. Younger generations are very savvy to the tools of marketing, the techniques, and they know that sometimes they're being fooled, if you will. And so they've learned to be very distrustful on the surface. You can earn their trust. I think that's a very important point. It's not to say they can't be trustful, but it must be earned when you're talking about this generation.
Very good. Thank you. Let's go to our third question, and it comes from the Organization of American States in Washington, D.C. The question, please.
Yeah, thank you. This is Sabino Morera from the Organization of American States. As an educator, I have several concerns, but I'm going to present only one. When we consider the independence, the demand of customization of Generation N, what impact do you think they will have in the educational system in light, for instance, of the multiple intelligences theory of Howard Gardner?
Okay, let's address that from two perspectives, if we may. Professor Cheng, it's a great question. Perhaps you can take it from the aspect of the educational systems, and then I have a follow-up, perhaps for Daniel.
Yes, I think that Howard Gardner's notion about multiple intelligences has brought us to also an awareness of creativity, where Generation Ners do appreciate creativity. And in the classroom, if we can create an opportunity for all students to explore his or her potential, whether it's spatial intelligence, whether it's intrapersonal or interpersonal. And we want to make space for these children to start early, create their niche, and begin to specialize in areas that they really can develop. I think this is where Generation Ners will tell the teachers what to do.
Okay. Are you seeing that as reality, Daniel?
Yeah, I would certainly agree with that. I think that students are now becoming determined much earlier in life of what they want to do later. And students would like to develop the skills that they need to enter an industry or a career field much earlier. So I think that teachers and educators should encourage them to do that. And that's something that is not necessarily being done right now.
Very good. Thank you. Let's go to our next call, which comes from the Universidad Tecnológica de Nezahualcóyotl from Mexico. Please, the question. And apologize for my pronunciation of that word.
Good morning. This is my question. As future businessmen and innovators in a global market that is changing, how can we maintain an appropriate profile to target these people and offer the appropriate products to them?
Let's look at that from a demographic perspective. Profiling generations.
Yes.
And maintaining enough information and database to address them.
Yes. I think you're already taking the first step just by being here today. Anyone who's listening is on the right pathway. What we find is those businesses that are the most successful are those that best understand this generation. And I tell people everywhere, step one is to actually go out and meet them, to actually go out and seek them out where they live, if you will. And, you know, listen to what they have to say about themselves. A lot of research takes place in an ivory tower or isolated from the group we're researching. But I think if people really do go out and investigate and learn about these generations, they will understand enough to reach them.
Good. Follow-up from the academic perspective on that, Professor Cheng, if we may.
Yes, I think there's also a trend in the field of education and higher education to look at how we can serve our populations better. That is, our students are sometimes able to lead us into thinkings that we haven't thought about. So modes of teaching must also be modified and actually change. in that arena, I think education will serve the populations a lot better by listening and getting in touch with the people out there.
So both of these aspects run in parallel. There's no divergence for ultimate success.
No.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That's a great question. Let's move to our next question, which comes from Grupo Sedva in Mexico. The question, please.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
Based on the features, skills, and knowledge of the Generation N in the American Union, the United States, Mexico, and Latin America, most of the people in this generation are children of divorced parents or parents who have left. What are the consequences, political and social, for this generation?
Well, I would like to take that question because I think many of us have experienced those things. But from a demographic perspective, how do you respond to that?
One thing we've seen already is that it makes this generation more independent and more capable of taking care of themselves, by which I mean they've had more responsibility at an earlier age when you have only one parent. But this is also true for families where both parents are in the workplace, which is very common. And so you find that they have to learn at an early age how to do a lot of things that they would not have had to years ago. Socially, I think it will have implications in terms of their individualism. Again, sort of the fragmenting of families into units of one or smaller units.
Daniel, as a young adult, what are you seeing amongst your peers as the impact of perhaps single-parent families?
Well, students and children are certainly becoming more independent earlier, and they're learning some of the life skills that they need at a much earlier age than previous generations have. So something that is very important, and this also carries into education, is to encourage students to learn these skills earlier. And the students that are able will learn them, and the students that are not will still be encouraged, but educators really need to understand that this generation wants to learn things early. They want to jump on the bandwagon of life a lot earlier than previous generations have been ready to.
Not only jumping on the bandwagon, it may be a response to necessity.
Sure.
So, good. Thank you all very much for that. Let's go to our next call, which comes from Centro Costarricense de Ciencia y Cultura in San Jose, Costa Rica. Question, please.
Dr. Mitchell, it seems as if Generation N and its demographic profile is very much marked by economic factors. How far do the socioeconomic factors go into impacting this generation more than as a cultural phenomenon, as a very specific social class within the younger generation?
The impact of economics, the development of social class because of it.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and this is something that is very significant in forming the character of a generation. Generation X came of age at a time when the economy in the U.S. in particular was not in really good shape, and they felt that lack of opportunity. They felt that promises to them growing up had been broken. In contrast, Generation N is coming of age at a time when the economic situation here is excellent, and they feel that they have limitless opportunity and potential, and combined with their sort of self-confidence and independence, it makes them, it really defines their character in a significant and different way from previous generations.
If I might interject on that
Please.
question, a lot of what I've seen and a lot of the students and children that I've associated with are very interested in the United States economy because it's in such good shape in the past year or several years. More and more what I'm finding from the research that I'm doing in development of our DAER for Kids page, which is specifically aimed for Generation N, is that kids want to learn about investing, and they want to learn about the United States economy. So that's something also that educators might encourage.
But Daniel, is wealth and economic robustness, if you will, a goal of Generation Ners?
No. Let me clarify that. I think that the entrepreneurialism of this generation is certainly not just to attain wealth. Kids are motivated because they are enjoying running the business. They enjoy being an entrepreneur. I definitely would admit that my motivation to run Internet Radio DAER is not by wealth. It's because I enjoy radio and programming the radio station.
And one will beget the other. The
Right.
wealth will come from it. Let's go to our next question, which comes from Cochabamba, Bolivia, and the Universidad Privada Boliviana. The question, please.
Yes, Mrs. Mitchell, based on your presentation, you've made very clear what the need is for good products and services for the Generation N, which obviously presents many challenges to the service providers. Could you comment on the challenges of being responsible for training this group? Say, what are the challenges for universities, institutes, etc.?
Yes, that is a very good question. On the one hand, we know what they want as customers. We are aware that they want customization, individualization, products and services on demand. But how do you create within this group the workforce and management skills needed to provide those exact same services? I think one of the things that educators, and this is a theme I think we've been sharing here today a bit, is to give them more specific skills. They want a roadmap or blueprint to success in the workplace. They want to know what the tools are and what the steps are to doing a good job. And I think very specific training would be welcomed by Generation N in preparing them to enter the labor force.
Thank you, Susan. Professor Cheng, a follow-up, are you seeing those dynamics actually take place at the university level?
I think that professors are actually driven by the needs of their students to move into a more technologically savvy classroom, what we call the smart classroom. Mm-hmm. But what concerns me more, and to answer your question, is that we need to also instill in our students a sense of social responsibility, a sense of ethics, and a sense of efficacy. Those are the things that must go hand in hand with any technological advances. Otherwise, you become very skilled. But what's being driven behind the skills is not guided by ethics and a world knowledge about the global community.
Some of those things do not come from the classroom, do they?
No.
Very good. Let's go to the next question. And it comes from the Murtha Educational Center at the University of Pittsburgh at Johnstown, Pennsylvania. And the question, please.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
We were discussing the needs of these children from the point of the divorce rates and the independence they feel. We're a little concerned about the treatment of many of these children with various drugs to worry about, to discuss their attention spans and to get them in more of a regimented mode that the older adults think is important. What's the impact of this kind of treatment on these people who want to be independent and develop these skills as they move along through their learning cycle?
Okay. Very good, the impact of pharmaceuticals on the educational process. Professor Cheng, maybe you could take this one for us.
I think it's very scary to think that drugs can help human problems. The lack of human contact is one thing that we have to worry about. If you sit in front of a computer and you get in touch with someone else through the internet, that's not really human contact in terms of physical presence. And to use drugs in place to calm people down, to think that it can probably cure attention deficit disorder is, to me, very worrisome. I think it's much better if we use humanity as our resources to help each other out, to understand that we may be lonely, but there are times that we can also form a community. So the generation ends do go face to face, from telephone to meeting people, and that human contact must be in there.
Very good, thank you. And thank you for your questions. They were excellent. Let us begin now with Module 2, in which Professor Lily Cheng will give us a global view of Generation N.
Thank you. As we face the dawning of the 21st century, many of us are looking back and asking ourselves, what have we accomplished? Among other things, we realize that we have reckoned with 2 world wars, a population explosion, countless environmental threats, and an information revolution. In the last 10 years, computer technology has developed so astoundingly that we can access information instantly through the World Wide Web. We can talk to someone thousands of miles away through interactive video conferencing, and we can save lives through the techniques of telemedicine. Multimedia technology allows trends to impact the furthest reaches of humankind directly and instantly. The pace of advancement in this field is formidable. The Generation X, young adults in the 23 to 34 age bracket, which today represent the majority of the global workforce, has been and still continues to be the most influential segment of our society behind these achievements. But directly behind it is the so-called Generation N, which is destined to lead us into the innovations of the 3rd millennium. I will provide a panoramic view of today's present trends and will briefly discuss the Generation Y and the Generation N. I will also present a framework for working with these generations. Generation Y, comprised of those within the ages of 18 to 24, the younger cohort of Generation X, and the predecessor of Generation N, which is comprised of those that are 18 years of age and under, is also known as the Echo Boomer generation. It is the first wave of the generation that came of age in the era of the computer and the internet. The first wave graduated from college in 1998 and have just begun to participate in the working world. Members of Generation Y are uniquely positioned to navigate the high-tech information services economy that is increasingly dominating the American workforce and many other parts of the world. Recent data suggests that members of this generation behave differently from those of previous generations. On the one hand, they are less risk-aversive, and on the other hand, they are more conservative than members of Generation X. Generation Y is characterized by the blending of the open-mindedness of the new millennium and the old-fashioned conservatism of the 50s. For example, 28% of the 15 to 24-year-olds who bought fresh flowers and plants in 1997 did so for Valentine's Day. 18 to 24-year-olds spent $165 million at flower shops or ordering by phone in the first 6 months of 1998. This group is more conservative about finding their soulmates, yet they're more open about meeting friends over the internet. For example, in 1996, America Online handled a few hundred personal ads on Love AOL for Valentine's Day. Today, they have more than 125,000 ads year-round. Of those, 23,000 come from people between the ages of 21 and 25. The 18 to 20-year-olds come in at a close second with about 20,000. Generation Ners make friends online, and some send email love letters and continue with online chats and perhaps follow up with voice, that is, telephone conversation, and then they may go what is called F2F, or face-to-face. They may even use cybervows, a chat room where people get married online by a love doctor. They may invite around 20 people to the ceremony.